Hey everybody, Chris here. Welcome back to 30-Day Excel Analyst. This is another session in Data Analysis Week. Yesterday, we looked at pivot tables, one of the most called on tools in Excel for doing data analysis, and we appreciated the pros, the power of pivot tables, also some of the cons, and some of the cons can be quite significant. So what are some of the alternatives to pivot tables? In this session, one of my absolute favorites, we're going to cover Excel data analysis formulae, a lean and mean alternative to pivot tables. And given the choice, I usually go for the data analysis formulae. So that's what we're going to learn over the course of the next 10 minutes or so. If you're watching live, leave me a comment in the chat. And if you're watching on replay, thanks for joining us too. Leave me a comment below. I will get back to you there. I want you to get as much value as possible out of 30-Day Excel Analyst, where we're aiming to transform your analytical skill set in around 30 days. So with that said, this is our overview of Data Analysis Week. So firstly, what is data analysis? It's one of the 4 key skill areas in Excel. Next week, we're moving on to Excel modeling. And the main approach, as we discussed, is pivot tables, certainly if you have discrete data. And that's really the starting point. What's the nature of the data that you're using? What questions do you need to ask about that data? Literally write those things down. That's going to guide your choice of tool, because if you're using continuous numerical data, for example, then you're going to want to use something like frequency, probably not pivot tables. So pivot tables, as I said, we appreciated the pros and cons, and I've summarized them here. You know, they're quick to generate. When you know how to do it, does a lot of work very quickly. Easy to integrate slicers and a timeline to give that dashboard feel. That's what we did yesterday. And it's fairly easy to update with new entries, which is a key advantage over Excel data analysis formally, as we're going to see today. But this interface can feel intimidating, difficult to set up. The layout's difficult to control. So when you refresh the data, you could have a layout that's not completely different, but different, that could mess up your aesthetic. And then it adds an object to the file and can detract from file efficiency. That's the same with data analysis formally, but I find pivot tables can really slow files down. So what advantages do data analysis formally offer? Well, rather than going through the points, let's get into the Excel file first. So as always, this file is available for download. You can see we've got our data in the file. I spoke about this file yesterday. We've got the pivot table and mini dashboard that we built yesterday with the slicers and the timeline, all good stuff. But what we're going to do is try to get the information the pivot table is giving us only using Excel formulae. That's our challenge. So how about that? Now, yesterday, we got started doing this using average ifs. Let's set ourselves a question here. So we can see we've got the average of punctuality, and I'm just checking here. There's no filters. Now there's no filters on the slicers there. So I just click this button to clear the filters from that slicer. So this is ARI's overall punctuality is 2.58. And you can see we managed to do that yesterday using average ifs. Let's do it again using average if singular. So you can see we've got different options here, average if singular and average ifs plural. Now, average if singular is going to allow us effectively to filter the data on the basis of a single criteria here. So what range do we want to filter on? That's got to be the name, because we just want to pick out ARI here, Control Shift down. Then what's the criteria? We're going to go for ARI here. And then finally, what's the average range? So which column do we actually want to sum up here? So it's the punctuality column that we're looking at first. You could choose any of those columns. And that's it. This is the average if formula. 3 components needed. We can go ahead and hit enter. We can see we've got 2.58. Validate that against the dashboard, and you can see we've got 2.58 there. All good stuff. So that's a single criteria analysis using Excel formulae. And it's super smooth. No infrastructure in the file, no pivot table interface, just a single formula. So how about that? What do you think about it? What if we wanted multiple criteria? Well, let's go for site as well. I'm going to go for Euston Road here. So ARI's average at Euston Road seems to be 2. So how to do that? Well, it's a little more complicated, because now we want 2 criteria. We want to filter by the name, and we want to filter by the site. So that means average ifs plural. You can see we've got the S in there. Now, what we need is slightly different. So first, we need the average range. This is different to average if. We don't need the average range first. We need the criteria range first. So the average range goes in, and then Excel's asking for criteria range one. So the first criteria we want to look at, we're going to go for the names here. We put that in, and then comma. You can see I'm working through this steady and systematically, taking the prompts here from Excel. Criteria one is going to be that name, Ari, from the name column. And then criteria two, well, our second criteria, control and up arrow here to go back to the top of the data set, is going to be site. And then I believe it's Euston Road that we wanted here. So typing that in. And of course, when you're typing in these criteria, they've got to be 100% accurate, but we'll look at some options for supporting that in a second. So the completed formula is going to look something like this. You can see it all there, and I will upload this file at the end of the session for you to look up. But you can see we've got the average range, we've got the first criteria range and the first criteria, the second criteria range and the second criteria there. Okay, and we've got a value of 2, and we can validate that against the pivot table here, and we can see a value of 2 there. Cool. So that's how to set up basic data analysis formulae in Excel. But, we'd want to do a bit more of that. Now, with a pivot table, a great strength of a pivot table is you can put a slicer in and you get that interactivity. People can just click a button, works really nicely. And I think this is a fantastic feature of pivot tables and of Excel generally. So we're currently missing that, aren't we, with our data analysis formula? Because we've got the criteria in the formula, it's quite difficult to update that formula. There's no sense of interactivity or kind of general coolness with what's going on here. So what options might you have? Well, you could introduce a name cell, and you could introduce a site cell here, and then those criteria in the formulae, we can take them out, put them in a cell, and then we're just beginning to make it feel a little more interactive. Now, one definite advantage of pivot tables over using data analysis formulae is a pivot table will automatically pull out the unique values from a data set. The pivot table is going to do that in the background. It's doing a huge amount of work for us in the background. If we're using data analysis formulae, we're going to have to manually, if you like, although we're going to use a formula to do that, pick out those unique values. We're going to do that in a second. Now, that has implications. If your data updates, if new data comes into the data set with a pivot table, we can just go ahead and hit refresh, and we're aware there might be changes in layout there. If you get new data into your table and you're using data analysis formulae, you're probably going to have to make some manual updates. So if you've got a dynamic data set that's changing a lot, pivot tables might be the only way for you, but it's all about appreciating the pros and cons here on 30-day Excel Analyst. So an alternative, if you're on Excel 365, most people are these days, is to use the unique formula, or you could use the data tab and remove duplicates. So this is going to do effectively what the pivot table is doing in the background for us. So this gives us all the names. I'm going to go Control C, Control Alt V, V here. And then in real life, I'd want to put this on a supporting sheet, that list of unique values. Just for simplicity today, we're going to keep it all on one sheet. And I'm going to do the same for site here. So our unique formula there is just pulling out the unique values, and I'm just converting them to values there, Control C and Control Alt V. Now we've got the unique values, we can put a drop-down menu in here to get, the feeling of having a nice interactive feature that's going to be better than just inputting values into the formula as we did originally. Alt-A-V-V on the Windows PC. We know about drop-down menus, of course, from Data Management Week, which was last week, of course, and it's all there for you, all available on YouTube for reference going forward. So now we can grab a name there. Same thing for sites, Alt-A-V-V. I'm going to go for list here, and then I can just select the list, and this is going to give us a couple of drop-down menus. So not as sexy as slicers, but still a big improvement on having this in a formula. And what we can go ahead and do now is take our formula, and rather than having ARI hard-coded, if you like, into the formula there, we can just select our input cell that we've created. And this is going to be tricky. So it's N5. So rather than having Euston Road here, I should be able to just put in N5, and we can see, yeah, we've got the same result there. But now there's a little more interactivity. Excel doesn't want to exit cut copy mode for some reason. There's a little more interactivity now because we can change the site. Now I was expecting my my formula to update there. Yep, we are on automatic calculation, but Excel seems to have kind of gone to sleep on me. We'll see. Anyway, that's how you can do it, guys. So let's look at this formula again. You can see, yeah, we've substituted those hard-coded values. We've substituted the cell values in there, and you should be able to get that to work. So you can change the cell values, and you can get everything working there. So I'm just going to take a short break here because my Excel file seems to have completely kind of closed down on me. So we're going to reopen that. So hopefully, yeah, you can just peruse this slide quickly, but hopefully you're feeling some of the pros and cons here. You're feeling the strength of data analysis formulae, which could be a nice alternative for you when you're thinking about whether to use a pivot table or not. Right. So Barry in the Angel Islington. Let's go. So Ari in the Angel Islington should have 3. So if we change this to Ari, change this to the Angel Islington, and you can see we've got 3 there. Yep. So we were able to do one thing 2 ways. Always validate what you're doing in Excel as far as possible. And you can see, yeah, it doesn't look very cool yet, but I've created many dashboards on this basis, picking out the unique values, creating a nice drop-down menu, and then using these data analysis formulae with a bit of formatting. And we've got a dedicated session to formatting coming up later in the course in 30-day Excel Analyst. With a bit of formatting, this can look really good in a dashboard. Right, one more thing we want to deal with. So our data is currently formatted as a table. And we mentioned in Data Management Week, you've got to have an approach to managing data in Excel. If more data comes in, are your formulae still going to work, for example? And tables is one way to do that. But you don't have to use tables. And there's many reasons not to use tables. I've got a dedicated video called Why I Don't Use Excel Tables. You can see that below this video. And if you don't use tables, these ranges are going to look very different. So these formulae and the range references you're using are going to look very different. So what we're going to do is going to select the table, going to quickly convert it to a range here. And now you can see Excel has automatically converted those table references that we originally used, converted those to range references. But let's go ahead and build the formula again. Just to get a feel. I'm going to use SUMIFs this time, just use a different formula. Let's build the formula again to get a feel what it would be like building this formula using range references rather than table references here. So suppose we wanted to sum up Ari's values for punctuality on a particular site. So if we're using SUMIFs, we want the sum range. So we want to sum up punctuality here, then comma. And then we want the criteria range. So the first criteria is going to be name. So I just hit Control and up arrow to take me to the top of the data set. First criteria range is going to be name. Now, absolutely crucial when you're building these data analysis formulae for ranges is to make sure these ranges are lining up in terms of the rows. Are the rows lining up? So E2 to E40, C2 to C140 rather, that's lining up. If there's any discrepancy there, the rows aren't lining up, that's going to be a problem, and you won't get an informative error message from Excel necessarily to tell you what the problem is there. So we've got Ari here. This input cell, then our second criteria. So once again, I'm taking the prompts from Excel, criteria range 2. Second criteria is going to be the sites, just checking those rows, D2 to D40. Seems to be accurate, and then the criteria is going to be the site selection here. Now, this is SUMIFs. So it's saying Ari has 2 inputs for the Angel Islington, and they add up to 6. So I'm going to just quickly put some filters on here. So Alt-A-T. This is another way for us to validate what we're doing with data analysis formulae. Just type in Ari here. I'm going to put the Ari name filter on, and then I'm going to type in Angel Islington here, enter, and Oh, it didn't put Ari's filter on, but I can see Ari's got an entry here for 2, and Ari's got an entry here for 4, and that adds up to 6. So using a manual filter there, just to check what we've done with the SUMIF formula. So basic data analysis formulae. We've got multiple criteria analysis going on here. We've got average ifs formulae, SUMIF formulae. There's also a count ifs formula here. So that's the same idea, but just doing counting. And there's also a max ifs formula and a min ifs formula, which follows the same principle. So that's going to allow you to apply multiple criteria and get the minimum or maximum value just for entries that conform to that criteria. And don't worry, I've got a slide in today's resources that summarizes all of the data analysis formulae that you need to know. Okay, so finally today, let's have a look at DSUM, DCount, and DAverage. DSUM, DCount, and DAverage. So the key advantage here is if you wanted to create a table similar to the pivot table, you'd have to have several SUMIFs formulae. Yeah, you'd have to build several SUMIFs formulae. You'd have to copy them down. You'd have to get those references right. You might want to use some partial absolute references with just those that single dollar sign. That would give you the whole table. Now, on a dashboard, you don't always want to see the whole table. Let's go ahead and illustrate what I'm saying here. On a dashboard, you don't always want to see the whole table. And if I put the name filter on, it allows me to see just a single row. So that idea of decluttering things and just seeing a single row, we can do that using DSUM. Highly recommend DSUM. It's been a while, guys. It has been a while since I've done a DSUM formula. So let's see how we go. So the DSUM formula, we have to set up what's called a criteria range. A criteria range. We have to put the headers for the columns that we're interested in. We have to put those headers in cells. So we're interested in name and site. And then I'm going to go ahead here and just make some inputs. In fact, let's copy down our drop down menus here too. So Control C and Control V here. So that's copied in the values and the data validation. And then let's see how we do. So let's go for DSUM. In fact, I'm going to go for DAverage here. So you got DSUM, DAverage, DCount. Database, field, and criteria. So you can see the composition of the formula is very different to average ifs and SUMIFs. It's actually quite a lot easier than using average ifs and SUMIFs to set up the formula, though it does require a bit of preparation setting up our criteria table. That's what we've just done there. Now, in Excel, I often see people filtering, as we just did a few minutes ago. We did some filtering in Excel and then using the subtotal formula, Now, subtotal has its applications. And one of the possible applications of subtotal, if I can even type it out here, one of the possible applications of subtotal is to only add up visible rows. So that's the way that people do this. Rather than using SUMIFs or DSUM, they use subtotal and then they use it to only add up visible rows. But that has the notable disadvantage of the fact you have to use filters. Yeah. And I really recommend, as far as possible, moving away from that manual filtering process in Excel because it takes so much time. You certainly don't want to be asking your customers to do that. So DSUM is a nice alternative. If you see that subtotal formula and people filtering, DSUM is going to do that with the power of a single formula here. So for database, we have to select our whole range now, or your whole table, including those column headers. So those column headers at the top are in the selection this time. So database, field, and then criteria. Okay, field is the column that we want to do the operation on. In this case, we're looking for an average. So the column that we want is punctuality. Now you can use a column number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 it would be, or more commonly for me, I've done it this way. I'm going to use the column header here, punctuality. There we go. And then closing the speech marks there. Then finally, criteria. Now, criteria, this is a bit tricky, but this is our criteria table that we've just set up. And you can see, it's just been obscured by the formula, unfortunately, there, but you can see I've included the headers that I typed in and the row below, The row below is where we're going to put those inputs in. And once again, with those headers, the headers, they have to be 100% accurate in terms of spelling there. Okay, that does seem to have worked using DSUM there. Let's try another entry here. So Barry at the Angel Islington, SUMIFs is returning 2. And then let's try Barry here. Barry at the Angel Islington and SUMIFs once again is returning a value of 2 there. So this is DSUM, and you've also got DCount. And let me just show you how easy it would be now to change this formula to DAverage, say. Let's go for DAverage here. And once again, we've got 2 there. Barry at the Angel Islington giving an average of 2. I've got, yeah, and that's the same as our average of ifs formula here. So pretty cool. And you can see this is a way for you to get that information without having to have the information kind of pre-tabulated as a pivot table would give you. You might want to display that information tabulated, but sometimes you want a really clean, slick dashboard, completely decluttered. And once again, doesn't look particularly impressive the way I've set it up today, but you can put that formatting on. And this DSUM formula I've used so many times over the years as a basis for an Excel dashboard. So with that said, guys, this is your Excel data analysis formulae, and this is your alternative to pivot tables. So if you're watching live, guys, thanks for being with us again. Pop your questions in the chat now. I will go through them in just a second. So to summarize a little bit, we talked about the pros and cons of pivot tables. Now you've seen data analysis formulae in action. Let's talk about some of the pros and cons. Well, it's lean and mean. No extra objects in the file. So no tables, pivot tables in the file. As I said, that can slow down file efficiency. Yes, data analysis formulae can do that too, but I find they do it less than a pivot table. Gives you total control of layout. For me, this is the main plus. When you play with a pivot table, the pivot table is going to change size. So no annoying or reset or regeneration. And now this is the number one reason I use things like DSUM and SUMIFs for dashboards, because I have control over how it's going to look. So it gives you the same power as a pivot table. If you can build the formula, and we saw today, the formulae are not simple and they require some preparation. They're going to require some testing. I pointed out some of the things you have to look out for on the way, getting those rows the same through all of the components of the formula. That's the most common mistake with SUMIFs or average ifs. So the downside, as we said, can be complicated to build and update with new entries. So this is the number one problem. If we were to have a new person in the data set, Kerry, Sophie, I don't know, whoever it might be, we'd then have to go through the process again of using the unique formula to get those entries, and we'd have to do some redesign there. Whereas with a pivot table, it will automatically update and pick out that new entry in the background. It will change layout, of course, in order to accommodate that, but it will pick out that entry automatically. Not easy to build in a visual or interactive element. Yes, this is another advantage of pivot tables. It's easy just to overlay those slicers and the timeline as we did yesterday. To do that with data analysis formulae is possible using VBA, and we've got Automation Week coming up later in the course. We're going to get you started with VBA. Is easier with VBA, but if VBA isn't an option for whatever reason, then it's quite difficult to kind of recreate that feel that a slicer gives you with Excel data analysis formulae. So there's a pros and cons. And included in today's resources, I've got your whole list, your complete list, if you like, of formulae for data analysis, COUNTIF and COUNTIFs. COUNTIF, I haven't really spoken about much, but this is my number one formula for analyzing discrete data, using COUNTIF all the time. SUMIFs, we've seen AVERAGEIFS, we've seen MAXIF, MINIFs, we've mentioned, and then frequency we saw in the first session this week is used to analyze continuous numerical data, drop it in those bins and get that beautiful bar chart visual. And then today we also covered DSUM, DAverage, and DCount. And then these formulae we covered on Monday. And these formulae are for, again, analyzing that continuous numerical data set. So this is it, guys. It's about looking at your data, understanding what's the nature of the data, understanding the questions you want to answer, and then making your technique selection on that basis. You're a critical consumer on 30-day Excel Analyst. You can appreciate the pros and cons and which tool is best to deploy in your situation. So with that said, guys, let's get into the chat. So who's with us today? Paul tune in. So Paul, it's been too long, long time support of the channel and our membership community members Monday. So great to see you, Paul. Thanks for tuning in. Arnie, how you doing? Have you been in every session, Arnie? I think so. Thanks so much for your support. HP tuning in. So no power in South Africa today. My wife is from Zambia. Her parents are beef farmers in Zambia. Why am I calling you HP? It should be HD for heavy downpour. So yeah, I do have some experience of being in Southern Africa and having no power. They never seem to have power. That might be unfair to say they never seem to have power, but quite frequently they don't seem to have power. Kieran, how you doing? Good to see you. Michael tuning in. How's it going? Natos is here, another long-term supporter of the channel. It's always good to see you, NATO. And Maz tuning in as well. Always good to see you, Maz. So, and Paul with a question. Instead of using a cell reference, would you not use as M5 name and N5 site more readable in the formula? Yes, potentially. So I think I did mention that, Paul. So rather than using the references in there, you could use the column header. I think that's what you're referring to, but not absolutely sure, Paul. Anyway, Paul, I know that didn't answer your question well, but thanks so much for being with us. So that's it, guys. Excel data analysis formulae. I hope you find a place for them in the Excel toolkit that we're putting together on 30-day Excel Analyst. Tomorrow, we'll be wrapping up Data Analysis Week, doing a bit of a summary and talking about charts. How do you create a good Excel chart? So important for finishing off your data analysis, telling the story of the data. We're going to talk more about charts tomorrow. Take care. I'll see you then.